I'm Pastor Tom, and welcome to the Sunday Sermon. My feet been pulled from the miry clay. I'm so glad I got good religion. I'm so glad I got good religion. I'm so glad I got good religion. Well, my feet been pulled from the miry clay. How I'm changing since I got good religion. How I'm moving since I got good religion. How I'm growing since I got good religion. My feet been pulled from the miry clay. I'm so glad I got good religion. I'm so glad I got good religion. I'm so glad I got good religion. Well, my feet been pulled from the miry clay. Yes, my feet been pulled from the miry clay.
So I'm going to read to you from the Gospel according to John, the 12th chapter, first 8 verses. 6 days before Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where he raised Lazarus from the dead. And they held a supper in his honor. Martha was serving. Lazarus was one of those reclining at table. And Mary took a pound of very costly perfume made of pure nard, and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, the one who was planning to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He didn't say this because of concern for the poor. He was the one who kept the money box, and he was embezzling from it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She has done this in anticipation of the day of my burial. The poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me." So there's a thing that pastors sometimes talk about, an experience that many of us have had, depending on the church and the location, and that's trying to get people to sit in a different location. Sometimes a pastor will go, "All right, I want everyone to get up and move to a different pew," and nobody wants to do that. Or if the church is like it's an early service where you don't have as many people, though that maybe a later service you kind of fill up the church, but in an early service you don't, everyone's still sitting in the back, and there's like 5 or 6 rows, what I call the demilitarized zone, right in the front. And you're like, "Everybody move forward," and then 2 of them do. And I get it. We love stability. We love certainty. We love predictability. We're comfortable with those things. It helps us feel grounded. And we like that. And that's okay. That's good. That's why we have things like liturgy. The power of liturgy is the way in which it speaks to us of an eternity. And we experience it because it's the same liturgy we've heard for a long time, the same words we've heard. And sometimes they don't mean anything in the moment. We may have recited the Lord's Prayer 1,000 times. But trust me, when the moment comes and you're like at the bedside of someone who's dying and you're gathered around and you pray the Lord's Prayer, it has a whole nother meaning. And you realize that it connected, that all of those experiences of just sort of doing it and maybe not even thinking about it, we're all building up to this moment where it's like, now that this is what it's doing. This prayer has connected me to that which is greater than myself. it's linked me to eternity in this moment. That's its power. So we have these rituals, these practices, these things that we do that we've always done, and we do them and do them and do them. Which, by the way, is why I always make sure to end every single Christmas Eve service with Silent Night, played on the organ, even though it was written for guitar. But sometimes things have to change in order to grow, right? So I have this saying, I'm always making up sayings. This is one of mine. He says, if you want a pearl, you first have to irritate an oyster. And boy, am I irritated. That's usually how it ends. But that's it. If you want a pearl, you first have to irritate an oyster. If you want growth, if you want the church to be more than just the place we come and do the things that we've always done, if you want to step out, you got to do something different. And that can be scary and difficult and troubling, and it's always hard. You always get some kind of pushback, always, just automatically. And I've seen that. When you first, brand new pastors are always like, oh, let's do something cool and new. And everyone's like, no. And it's like, oh, I don't know what to do. And then you get older and you're like, oh, I know the secret. Learn the secret of change over time. But it's still a struggle. It's still a struggle if the way things have always done, they're different now. What are we going to do with that difference? It just doesn't feel the same anymore. Church isn't the way like when I was a kid, it just felt like it was, and now it doesn't. I like the old hymnal, that kind of stuff. I mean, that's how we are. I get it. So the Methodists, our story, we were founded by the Wesley brothers, right? And John predominantly, because he was sort of the brainiac behind it all. Very uptight guy, by the way. Really uptight. He was very serious about his faith. He was a very serious guy, very serious about his faith. Went to seminary, was ordained a priest, came to the colonies, was in Virginia, where he had a disastrous pastorate. And he was on his way back to England. And he fell among a group of people who were not part of the Anglican Church. He was an Anglican priest, Church of England, in the United States, that's Episcopalian. And but he's hanging out with these people, and they probably didn't have the theological understanding that he did or the education that he did, but they had something he didn't have, and he was kind of hungry for it. And he hung around with them long enough. He actually, when he got back to England, went to one of their church services. I don't know if church service is the right phrase for how they gathered together, but he was at one of their gatherings. And he had this experience that he hadn't had before. He experienced the presence of God and the grace of God and the Spirit of God in himself in a way that was different than before. There would always been this thing like, I have to understand everything in order to embrace the divine or something like that. I mean, it was just really in his head. And then here he was in the service, and he felt something. Now, most normal people would have been like, oh my goodness, the Lord touched me. I felt the Spirit of God in me. It was amazing. I was like the light exploding inside me. And John Wesley, he went, I felt my heart strangely warmed. Oh my goodness. Yeah, he was really uptight. He really was. But he understood that this was a very important experience to not just like have information about God, but to feel that connection with God in a very deeply personal way. And he thought other people might benefit from that too. So he kind of developed, he wanted to do he wanted to help other people get there. So like special services maybe in the church, you go into the church, and then after the regular worship, they could do like nowadays we would call it a revival meeting or something along those lines, something to help people connect with God and get that faith more personal, more like, instead of being like, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, but more like me and Jesus, right? You know that old song, me and Jesus, got our own thing going, me and Jesus, gonna work it out, right? That sense of connection, of relationship, of it being not just a thing out there, but a thing in here too. Like on every level, I'm connected to God. And so he started working on that, and it did not go well. Not because it wasn't a great idea, but because the seven, this is something we learn in seminary, it's called the seven words of a dying church. We have never done it like that before. And that's how the church was. The church back then, they were like, that is not how it's done. That is unseemly to get like emotional in church. What is wrong with you? And so Wesley had to go out, and he started talking on the hills. Outside, he started holding what, again, like we would call a revival meeting, and hooked up later with another guy named George Whitefield, who was a Calvinist. They would argue theology, but they would talk about the love of God and the grace of God and invite people to get to know God personally. And it was they ended up preaching to like coal miners in Wales, these Welsh coal miners. Now, these are working class, but at that time in England, working class meant working poor, right? Not, in America, a good working class job means you're middle class. At least that's what it did when I was growing up. So these were the forgotten people. They didn't go to church. The church didn't seem to care about them. The church was for the folks who belonged. And so Wesley's preaching to them, and Whitefield's preaching to them, and these people start experiencing something. And Wesley starts forming them into things he called classes, and he's teaching them how to handle money, and he's teaching them how to be healthy. And he was a very interesting guy in that way. He was teaching them all kinds of useful, practical stuff, what we call practical theology. And he was helping people figure out how to live their lives better. So Bev and I were talking before the service about how much ministry and social work are like. This is John Wesley doing social work. I mean, right there. He was doing classes to help people learn, but every one of those classes, which included Bible study and things like that, began with this question: how is it with your soul? So he was inviting people to not just learn some stuff, but to start to connect together in community in this deeply powerful way. And out of that grows what we nowadays call the Methodist Church, right? Or United Methodist Church, or Wesleyan Church, depending on which of the many branches of the tree you're talking about. And it comes from somebody just doing something different, right? Somebody saying, hey, I've had an experience of grace that I want to share, and getting pushback, but not stopping. Why am I telling you this? So Jesus has come back to Bethany. It's before Passover. You got to understand that most people don't stay in Jerusalem during Passover or any of the high holidays, because like the hotels fill up really fast, and pretty much you got to have a lot of money so everyone stays in the suburbs. So Jesus, I'm sure he had a standing reservation at the Motel 6 in Bethany, and he has friends there. And he's at somebody's house. Now, the Gospel of Mark tells us it's a guy named Simon the leper. You've got Lazarus there. Jesus is the guest of honor at dinner. Lazarus is there. Martha's serving. So it's possible, some people have suggested that maybe Simon was the father of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, these three siblings that we heard about last week. I don't know. But what I want to remind you is Martha and Mary, who they are. Because Martha's she's the one who's doing what she's supposed to do. Like, this is what you're supposed to do. She's serving, she's doing the thing, she's taking care of everything, make sure everyone's, can I refill that for you? Okay, she's making sure that all of the hospitality is properly functioned, that the guest of honor is properly treated, that everyone's behaving, that it's all being done right, that she's on top of it, very organized. And then there's Mary. Mary, who's just wears her heart on her sleeve. She's the one who's just out there with everything. She's that person, I described her this way last week, the kind of person who when she's happy, you want to be with her because she makes you happy too. And when she's sad, you want to make her feel better. She's that person. She's so like out there with her feelings and her emotions. That means that some of the things she does, we might describe as impulsive. But she does them out of love and kindness and just the desire to express that love and kindness that she has. And so here they are in the middle of this event, and she takes this bottle of perfume and she opens it up and she dumps some on Jesus' feet, and she's like getting it all over. So she's wiping his feet off with her hair, and the smell is filling the room. And now, John's gospel it reveals something about how villains evolve in their villainy. Like, you have a person who does something terrible, and at first you're like, he seemed like such a nice guy. I can't believe he did that, right? But wait a few years, nobody remembers the nice guy part of their life. They only remember the terrible thing. So in other words, the person becomes the most terrible thing they ever did. And then more terrible things often are created to them, or they look for, like, oh, look, the books look funny. I bet he was embezzling, right? This stuff happens. This is a natural human phenomenon. So Judas, who, like, if you're reading the Gospel of Mark, first gospel written, remember, about the year 65, 70, somewhere in there, and the one that's the template for Matthew and Luke's gospel. But if you're reading Mark, it's like every time Judas is mentioned, it's like, Judas, the one who would betray him. Like, who would do that? That's just... But by the time you get to John, Judas is the villain he's the monster who snuck into our midst. He's just terrible. Like, nobody's seeing the good anymore. But Mark doesn't single Judas out in the criticism. He actually says, those there said, why wasn't this sold? So that suggests that even if Judas was the henchman, like, this money I could have been, even if that piece of it is part of the motivation for Judas, there were others saying the same thing. And that's what happens. Like, you want to do something good, you're in the church and you say, hey, I want to make a difference. So you try to make a difference. You're going to get criticism. I guarantee it. It's going to happen. Somebody's going to push that back. Now, there can be outsiders going, that's just not right. They shouldn't do that in that church. But there's going to be other church members saying the same kind of stuff. I promise you. Because that's how that goes. Doesn't matter what it is. Had somebody say to me once, hey, I'd like to do an exercise class, like aerobics, here at church, a couple times a week for like all these stay-at-home moms like me, and we'll play like Christian music and stuff like that. And I said, sounds great. We need to do the vote thing so it gets on the insurance, but no problem. Sounds like a great idea. So they did it. And then I had somebody walk up to me once and, this is just not appropriate. They're going to wear out the carpet in the fellowship hall. Meanwhile, a whole bunch of people were coming to the church who hadn't been part of the church, who hadn't been to the church, who hadn't really thought about faith and grace, and they were just exercising. But the music was talking about faith and grace, and then the conversations that would sometimes happen were about faith and grace, and then the leader would maybe do a quick little meditation or read a scripture or something. And so here are these people who, for the first time, maybe in a long time, were in a place where someone is inviting them in to experience more than just like be healthy physically, but be healthy spiritually. The question not how you feeling today, but how is it with your soul hiding underneath that experience? And this went on for a number of years. And finally, but to the credit of the person who had been critical, a few years later came up to me and said, I get it now. But a lot of times we don't at the time. And that's what Jesus is saying, that Mary's doing this thing and everyone's criticizing, and Jesus is like, yeah, you don't get it. You don't get it. I got to tell you something. She's preparing me for my burial. You can take care of the poor. You need to take care of the poor because they're always going to be around. You don't always have me. By the way, in the Gospel of Mark, when Mark tells this story, there are a few differences between the two tellings, but when Mark tells this story, the way Mark tells it is Jesus adds this line: wherever the gospel is preached, what she has done today will be remembered. There's this old, so there's this thing called a midrash, which is commentary on the Hebrew scriptures, and they're old, and a lot of times they consist of like Rabbi so and so said this, and Rabbi so and so thought that, and like these are like ancient rabbis, and nothing written down, just remembered for like hundreds of years before it's finally written down. But this is midrash. But there's a midrash apparently that talks about a reputation. Says your reputation is like the smell of fine perfume, the smell that fills the house and can spread into the whole world. So you kind of hear that behind what in Mark's gospel, what she has done here will be proclaimed wherever the gospel is preached. You can hear the hints of that same rabbinic thought floating back there. But John was very clear about this. She did a good deed, and the smell of it filled the house. The entire house is filled with the fragrance. And that says something. It says something about how we may do a thing that nobody expects, that nobody agrees with, but we're just doing it because it's a good thing to do, what's called a mitzvah, a good deed. And like the fragrance of the perfume, it begins to spread outward, fill the spaces around us with the grace of God in ways we didn't even predict or understand at the time. And so this becomes the heart and soul of the question, like for us as believers. We can do church one way only, or we can do church in more than one way. If we do church in one way, if we live our lives in one way, if we say, what if people don't like it? Because I've seen this. I've seen people have great ideas and then stop with their great ideas because they were worried about the criticism that was going to come, not from the outside world, though it certainly would have, but from the other people in the church. And they were afraid of that, and so they stopped the good thing they were trying to do. So we can do that. We can just say, let's not do anything. We got a good thing going here. Let's just keep doing the good thing that we're doing. It ain't broke, so don't fix it. And I kind of agree with that. And I don't want to say but, I want to say and. We could decide not to be afraid. Yeah, do the stuff that works, that doesn't need fixing, but we could also do some of the scary stuff. We could do the stuff where we risk like loving people in ways that other people might think that's just not how it should be done. You're just making it, you're coddling them. You need to, whatever. To take that risk, to step out and to do something bigger, to invest more, to try harder, to try something new, to kind of like, hey, what happens if we do this? Let's see if we can't shake something out. And if we do that, you have to know we will get criticized. There will be pushback. But we don't know if that will turn out to be the aroma that fills up the house. And we can't find out unless we try. Can you find the prayer of response then? Sometimes I am timid about trying to do anything radically kind or drastically compassionate. I fear the criticism that will come not only from strangers, but also come from those who are part of my world. Maybe I should do nothing, dare nothing, risk nothing. But if I do act, my kindness, my grace-filled deed could be like a perfume whose fragrance fills the house. This is the choice, to do nothing bold for fear of criticism and opposition, or to brave disapproval and dare love. Lord Jesus, today I choose the way of loving. May my deeds be a fragrance before you. In your name, amen.
We'd love to have you join us for in-person worship Sunday morning at 8:30 at Christ United Methodist, or Sunday morning at 10:15 at Stanton United Methodist. And if Sunday morning is not your jam, join us Monday night, 6 o'clock at Christ United Methodist,
for Pizza Church. It's church, and then we eat pizza. Until next time, may the Lord God bless you and keep you. May the face of the Almighty be upon you, and may God grant you peace.